Today on the Bourbon Bites podcast, I'm reviewing Fortuitous Union, a blend of rum and rye whiskey, and talking about some whiskeys coming soon that you should keep an eye out for. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Bourbon Bites podcast. I'm your host Clifton, and today we have a very, very interesting whiskey that I will be reviewing, or I guess I can't call it a whiskey, right? It is a whiskey that's been blended with rum. Trust me, I'll get into it. It's a weird one. So first off, I have to give a shout out to our good friend Swan, Swan TBF on Instagram. He sent me the sample. As soon as he mentioned that this existed, I knew I wanted to try it. So huge shout out to Swan. He is a patron of the show, one of the newest patrons actually, and he's been a supporter the whole time, so thank you so much, Swan. I have no idea what to expect from this one, but let me tell you all about it. So this is called Fortuitous Union, and it's from Rolling Fork Spirits. So the story behind this is actually kind of funny. So Rolling Fork actually focuses on bringing a bunch of different types of rum to the US market, and they also do some finishing of the rum on site as well. And with this bottle, they had just spent 6 years finishing a 12-year-old rum from Trinidad in bourbon casks when a warehouse worker transferring it to a steel tank didn't realize that the tank still contained 5-year-old MGP rye whiskey. So they called it the Fortuitous Union, or FU for short, aka F up. So this sounds very similar to kind of what happened with Wild Turkey Forgiven. It's happened to a couple of other brands, but they thought it was, just an awesome combination. They decided to release it. This comes in at 51.5% ABV, which is 103 proof. So officially this is labeled as a distilled spirit specialty because it's kind of a combo. So, but it is a Trinidad rum blended with a 5-year-old rye whiskey. So age statement wise, technically it's 5-year rye, but it's also a 12-year rum. We don't know the mash bill, but we do know it's about 75% or more rum and then 25% or less rye. And MSRP on this one is $65. So the only thing remotely similar to this I've had was the Caribbean rum rye from from Basil Hayden. I don't know if you guys saw that bottle. It came out a few years back, but they actually blended rye whiskey with a rum, and I thought that was way too sweet. I was not a fan of that. Now, to be fair, that was intentional. So this was a bit accidental, or so they say. It could have been intentional too. But let me look at that one real quick just to see how it compares. Yeah, so the Basil Hayden Caribbean Reserve rye is an experiment combining rye whiskey with a touch of rum. So they actually blended in that blackstrap rum. Now, I'll be fair, I have not had that bottle in years. I didn't love it, but it is low proof. This one is coming in at 51.5% ABV, so maybe the proof will actually help it out. It's also Trinidad rum. I'm not super familiar with that flavor profile. I love a good Barbados rum. Sometimes I'm in the mood for like a Jamaican rum, but I'm pretty new to rum. I love it as a category, honestly. If I wasn't a whiskey person, I would be a rum person, because rum is such a diverse and interesting category, and I love rum cocktails as well. So I'm very, very excited to try this Fortuitous Union. So let's go and get it poured. Wow, the color on that's so weird. It's kind of like red tinted. It's kind of got like a dull copper kind of note, but it's definitely more red hued than I expected. Let's go and give it a nose. Ooh, okay. That's definitely rum focused. Like we said, 75% rum, so that's the first thing that jumps out of this glass. It's kind of, it's not funky like a Jamaican, at least on the nose. It's more of like the molasses, the brown sugars, the really sweet rum notes. Sometimes I really enjoy. Rum is one of those things that I'm so particular about, because I've had some incredible rums from like Foursquare, Barbados, that region. I think I love that. I love that they don't add sugar. It's just a natural, like unchill filtered cask strength rum. I do know there are other brands that, tend to, put the sugar back into it, and they do add the sweetness back into the rum. I'm not the biggest fan of those. Just based on experience. I know that some of the ones that are good for cocktails, like there's an overproof rum that I just picked up, Lemon Heart Rum 151, and that one does have that sweetness too, but that proof really kind of makes up for the fact that it's a bit sweeter. But this does smell sweet on the nose. I don't know for sure if they've added the sugars back into the rum, but when I try to search for those rye notes, it's kind of interesting. We do know that this rum was finished in bourbon barrels for 6 months before they actually blended in the rye whiskey. So I do get a bit of that oak, which at first I was like, oh, that's from the rye. But, it could just be from the bourbon finish or the fact that this is a 12-year-old rum. It kind of reminds me a bit of like a little bit of like a cask strength brandy. And my mind goes to Copper and Kings. They have one called Butchertown Brandy, which I believe is an apple brandy. That one is so bourbon-like and so whiskey-like, but it's a brandy. It has those sweeter, fruitier notes. And this kind of is reminiscent of that, but man, that's super interesting on the nose. It actually smells like a cocktail. Now that it's opened up a bit, it's not as sweet as when I first gave it a nose, but this one's so interesting. I'm going to have to taste this before I can judge it. So cheers, guys. Let's go ahead and taste it. Ooh, okay. Again, not what I expected. It's not nearly as sweet as it smelled. I think the nose of the rum was shining through, but on the palate, it's similar to like a brandy. It does have kind of like a little bit of like an orange zest kind of note on it. Definitely fruit forward. There is a lot of oak though on the finish and a bit of spice on the finish that has to be coming from that rye whiskey. It definitely shows its proof. I mean, at 51.5, I honestly would probably guess it's a little bit higher proof, which y'all know. I love high proof whiskey, so I understand that's a good thing for me. For rum, I usually find rum to have a nicer mouthfeel, especially the cask strength higher end rums. This is a little thin. It makes it up in the spiciness though on the back of the palate, and like the kind of like lingering molasses, not super sweet molasses. It's kind of like a more dulled molasses mid palate. But wow, that's actually a really nice pour. It's definitely not funky like a Jamaican rum up front. It has a little bit of that tropical note, kind of like the banana, not like fake banana, but more of like a mushy, like a little bit overripe banana kind of note. But it's definitely that mingled with like tropical fruits. And again, it's still some of that orange zest up front. Very, very fruity up front. Mid palate is kind of that brown sugar molasses. And then on the finish, spice. It's kind of a short finish, but it has a really nice like warming, like spicy sensation on the back end. And it does linger in the back of the throat a bit. Not necessarily like a Kentucky hug, like it's not like lingering down the throat, but it kind of sticks to the back of the tongue. So, I said short finish. I would probably say medium finish when you take that into account. But I gotta say, I am a fan of Fortuitous Union. Now, this was a limited release, and, some people say it's gimmicky, right? It's like, oh, it was an accident. I don't know for sure. I'm taking their word for it, kind of like Wild Turkey, Forgiven. But honestly, for $65, this is such a unique spirit, and it's actually pretty dang good. So, yeah, I'm a fan of this. This is a winner in my book. Thank you again, Swan, for this sample. I'm going to sip on this a bit more while I get into some new releases that I'm so excited for. This is going to be a very whiskey-centric episode. I know sometimes I mix in the gaming news, but there are so many TTB labels that have kind of leaked a bit that I have to talk about because some of these have got me really excited. As always, huge shout out to Cumming Whiskey on Instagram. He is always the first to upload these and share these with the whiskey community. If it wasn't for him, I could look it up myself, but he makes it so easy for us. And he's also, he's a supporter of the show. He likes my stuff on Instagram, so definitely follow Cumming Whiskey. All credit goes to them for these labels that I'm looking at here. Well, since we're talking about Wild Turkey Forgiven, I think the first one worth mentioning is Wild Turkey Unforgotten. So this is the label for the next Wild Turkey Master's Keep. It is a blend of Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey and rye whiskeys finished in a rye cask. So very, very similar to the Forgiven. But this is, of course, the Master's Keep. It's probably got a good bit more age on it. It comes in at 105 proof. And that's about it. That's all I know about it so far. Again, this is just the label from the TTB website. As someone that tried a sample of Forgiven and really enjoyed it, I am excited for this release. I would kind of wish it carried some sort of an age statement or something that made us a little more excited for it. I love when these older, like these LEs have age statements or at least some info in terms of like what actually went into it, because we know it's a bourbon and we know it's a rye and we know it's finished in rye cask, which, by the way, finishing bourbon and rye in a rye barrel is interesting in itself, and I'm really curious to see how that'll express itself. But if you are a fan of Forgiven, I think this is definitely one that you need to keep an eye out for. It's so it's definitely reminiscent of that one. And is Forgiven discontinued? Am I crazy? I've only seen Forgiven ever on the shelves in Austin, Texas, where when I went for the Bastards Ball meetup last year, that was the first time I ever saw Forgiven on the shelves. So let me know, is that discontinued? If so, it's interesting that they decided to make this a Master's Keep. Maybe it's the old stocks of Forgiven, Never know. We'll have to keep an eye out for more information on that, but I thought that was kind of relevant to throw in there first. And I'm just going to go with the flow. We were just talking about Austin, Texas. Texas, Still Austin has a brand new label for a 4-grain bourbon whiskey. I mentioned on a previous podcast they have just started releasing their rye whiskey, which we got a little sneak preview of that when we were down there in October. But this is a blend of their rye, corn, wheat, and malted barley mash bills. The mash bill is actually 68% white corn, 15% rye, 13% wheat, and 4% malted barley. And according to the label, it says, "For this one-of-a-kind release, we've enlisted the incomparable team at Fort Lonesome to create this beautifully detailed, handmade fabric label with a removable, chain-stitched patch. But this release is more than just a pretty face. The spirit inside this bottle is a product of only 2 barrels, distilled from a lively combination of white corn, rye, wheat, and malted barley. This whiskey weaves together the exceptional beauty both inside and out." So by the way, this is aged at least 2 years old. So it's not necessarily their oldest stock. Now their label, I only have a preview of the front of it. It's just kind of like their bird logo on the front. It's like a blue label with gold writing. I don't really see the chain stitch patch they're talking about. Maybe it's a patch version of the bird, which would be really cool. But I mean, I am such a fan of Still Austin's whiskey, both their bourbon, their cask strength bourbon, and their rye that we try at the distillery. For some reason, they are the most, I guess, approachable Texas whiskey. A lot of Texas whiskey has a bit of a Texas funk, I like to describe, that comes from those hyper aging barrels because of the Texas heat. This, though, Still Austin has always maintained a very bourbon lover flavor profile. So I'm very, very excited to see what this 4-grain whiskey is all about. No idea about release. I still haven't seen the rye out here. Actually, I don't think I've even seen Still Austin out here. I know when I interviewed Chris Seals on my YouTube channel, he did mention they are going to expand their distribution to places like Southern California. I think even they had a deal with Total Wine coming soon, so we should see it around the country. But I'm not sure how limited this new 4-grain release is, but needless to say, I'm very, very excited for that one. Another one I'm super excited for, based on my past experience with other releases, is the Remus Gatsby Reserve. Now, this will likely be a bottle that none of us really see. This is a 15-year-old straight bourbon whiskey at cask strength. It's their 2022 limited edition release. Now, I don't know for sure, is this replacing the Remus Reserve? Because this is Remus Gatsby Reserve. Same bottle shape, it seems, but it is a 15-year-old release, which, that's a 15-year-old MGP. They're saying this celebrates the release of Great Gatsby a century ago. Well, definitely 15-year-old MGP is definitely something of legends. It's some of the most prized distillate coming out. A bunch of different distilleries are releasing this similar distillate. I know Smoke Wagon has some single barrels that are really, really well aged. There's other brands doing the same thing. So I imagine that this bottle is going to go for so much money. It's probably also going to be nearly impossible to find. But needless to say, I'm very, very excited for it. I've never had an MGP that old. I've had it in blends, like the last Remus Repeal Reserve, Batch 5. It was incredible, by the way, as well as 3 and 4. I think Batch 5, I thought I liked best, but then I did it on a blind flight on YouTube, and it did not come out on top. So check out my YouTube channel for more on that, youtube.com/bourbonbites. By the way, patrons just got a little preview of all the incredible guests coming on the channel soon. I have guests locked in for pretty much every week up until June, with a couple exceptions there, but some really awesome brand reps, some master blenders, some owners and founders of different companies. It's going to be a great time. If you are not yet supporting me on Patreon, this would be an incredible month to do so, because I really do credit my patrons for making this possible. I mean, I wouldn't be able to put in as much time and effort as I do if I, wasn't being supported as much as you guys support me. So this is all thank you to patrons. I'm super, super excited. So if you want to see a preview of that for as little as $2 a month, you can support the show on Patreon, patreon.com/bourbonbites. With that, let's go and move on to some of these other new releases that I'm so excited for. Next up is another collaboration. I love when brands do this, but this is one that may sound familiar, but it's definitely different. So High West has put out a new product that they are calling the Prisoner's Share. So this is a blend of straight whiskeys finished in the Prisoner Red Blend wine casks, which, another brand called Bardstown Bourbon Company did something very similar. Now that was, Tennessee whiskey that was finished in those Prisoner casks. I assume with this being High West, it's most likely going to be Indiana whiskey. Taking a quick look at the back label, it just says a distinctive blend of aged straight rye and straight bourbon whiskeys finished in the Prisoner red wine casks to highlight the sophisticated notes of raspberry jam, toasted mahogany, creme brulee, black pepper, cherry cola, and French oak spice. Decadent, indulgent, unforgettable. I love that description. It either teeters on the BS meter or like the tingles at the back of your neck meter. It's kind of falls somewhere in the middle of that. But anyways, I do love High West finished products, especially like Midwinter's Night Dram. It does say that there is some rye whiskey blended in here as well. So it's not a bourbon, it's actually a blend of straight whiskeys. So very excited to see if that comes out. It seems to probably, based on High West, other releases, it may be a distillery only release. We might have to reach out to our Utah friends to get a bottle or a sample of those. I'm talking to you, Adriana and Nick. But no, seriously, it sounds really interesting. I'm very curious to see how that one will come out. It seems a lot of people are really excited for that one as well. And lastly, one that came out a few weeks back, I actually didn't have a chance to talk about it. This is Jack Daniel's Twice Barreled American Single Malt. So this is the follow-up to the Coy Hill release that came out last year. This is the 2022 special edition. Maybe one of many, I'm not sure. But this is a American single malt whiskey that is Oloroso sherry cask finish. It says crafted from 100% malted barley, twice barreled for a complex taste, and bottled straight from the finest Oloroso sherry casks. So the sample label says 108 proof. I'm not sure if that's just a placeholder or it's consistent, but it is a limited bottle number. So it's maybe not a single barrel release, but it does seem to be a very, very limited release. I am excited. I have tried Jack Daniel's malt whiskey. It was a bit, youthful for sure. I'm hoping that this coming in at cask strength is going to be a little bit more age on it. But yeah, American single malts is kind of a quickly growing category, and it's super interesting to see Jack Daniel's jump into that world. It's so different from what we're used to from them. If it's anywhere nearly as delicious as their barrel proof rye and bourbons have been, especially the Coy Hill releases. By the way, if y'all missed the podcast a couple weeks ago, I did a flight of 3 different hazmat Coy Hill releases. Actually, that wasn't a couple weeks ago. That was last week. Wow, look at me getting behind on my own podcast. But yeah, if y'all missed last week's episode, please listen to it after this. It was so much fun doing that with a few friends in my local group. But we've all grown to become Jack Daniel's fans, at least in my local group. I see that a lot on Discord as well, and I think a lot of people are really excited for this release. I'll look at some comments here. ASM Podcast says, damn it, my brain just pulled a hammy. So many questions. I'm right there with you, ASM. And then KY Waterman says, I'm shocked by this. Would not have guessed Jack would have been working on this. Me either. Bourbon Seeker says, American Single Malt from Jack Daniel's. Probably going to have to sell my kidneys to afford the secondary on this one. Well, hopefully, I had a lot of friends able to grab the Coy Hill release. I was not one of those friends. Thankfully, they share samples. But yeah, I hope to get my hands on this, or at least try it, because it seems so interesting. So please let me know if you guys are as excited about this one or any of the other releases as I am. Let me know on Discord which one is your favorite one that you are excited to get your hands on, or try to at least. But yeah, keeping it pretty short this week. Thank y'all so much for listening in. If you have any suggestions for topics on this podcast, feel free to shoot me an email, contact@bourbonbites.com, or let me know on our Bourbon and Whiskey Gaming Lounge Discord server, which you can find at bourbonbites.com. Always looking for suggestions or things you want to hear my opinions on, and make sure to leave me a rating on your favorite podcast platform if possible. Really does mean a lot, whether it's a thumbs up, it's a 5-star, or a review. If you leave a review, I'm happy to read it out on the next episode, but most of all, I really just appreciate y'all listening. So thank you for tuning in. This has been the Bourbon Bites Podcast, a whiskey podcast with a gaming twist. I'm Clifton. Cheers, and I'll talk to you next episode.